Hello, everyone. Again, I am Rolando Mendez. I am Director of Teach Access, and I'm joined today by Leslie Johnson, our Project Coordinator, and Kay Sonka, our Executive Director. And today we're going to take a closer look at the Accessibility Skills Gap. So here's a roadmap for today's talk. First, we'll do some introductions. We did kind of that just before we started. We're going to talk about accessibility, the what, the who, and the why. Some challenges around accessibility and implementing accessibility in organizations, also about the accessible technology skills gap, the accessibility skills, how ways you can bridge the gap, accessibility skills gap, in a way to start your accessibility journey, and we'll do a Q&A at the end, but feel free to drop your questions in the chat while we go through our presentation. So first, introductions. On the screen, you will see a picture of 4 people. There's the Teach Access staff from left to right, Kate Sonka, our Executive Director, Leslie Johnson, Mindy Colin, our Director for Development and Industry Partnerships, and on the right, myself, Rolando Mendez. And we're from Teach Access, which is a US-based nonprofit organization founded in 2016. And it's a collaboration between educational institutions, industry, government, and disability advocacy organizations around the country. And we're focused on teaching accessibility and supporting efforts to teach what we call teach accessibly, or in other words, making sure that your content, your strategies are accessible to people with disabilities. And our goal is to reach 1 million students by 2030. As by some of our accounts, we have already hit that half mark of a 500,000 students, I'm sorry. And it's always good to tell everyone that all of our programs and resources are for free. We want to eliminate barriers to gaining accessibility knowledge. So all our programs and resources are free. And even for some of the programs, we pay people to participate in them. So I'm going to present this on behalf of our colleague, Kristen Russell.
I was gonna say, Rolando, this is Leslie, let me stop you. Kristen did say she was able to join by phone. I know it shows she's muted, so I don't know if she can unmute herself yet.
Can you hear me?
Yes, Kristen.
We can.
Am I here? Hooray! Well, it's wonderful to be with you all. Thank you so much. I'm not sure what's going on technologically, but that's all right. My name is Kristen Russell. I am the Program and Curriculum Manager at the American Foundation for the Blind. AFB is, we just celebrated our centennial. We were founded in 1921. And our mission is to create equal opportunities and expand possibilities for people who are blind and have low vision through advocacy and thought leadership and strategic partnerships, as well as a plethora of programs. You most likely have heard of our most famous ambassador, which was Helen Keller, who stewarded the organization for 44 years. And we continue to build on her legacy, making sure that we are at the forefront of new technology and policies and practices in digital inclusion. And so sorry for being late here today.
Not your fault. I'm taking all responsibility for that one. We're glad you're here.
Glad to be here. Thank you guys so much.
All right, this is Leslie Johnson again. I'm going to talk about accessibility, just set some definitions and some groundwork when we talk about accessibility, and the what, the who, and the why for it. So what is accessibility? And these are just like I said, this is just a really good basic definition that we use. It's the inclusive practice of removing barriers which prevent access to information and functionalities in digital content. We will focus mostly on, or pretty much all on, digital accessibility. So in digital spaces, apps, websites, interfaces like that. We also say it is the design of products, devices, services, or environments for people with disabilities. And it's always important to remember that what might be accessible for one person may not always be accessible for someone else. They may have different needs or different requirements. And even if two people have the same exact disability, they may have different impacts or, again, have different needs. So it's always important to keep that in mind. Disability is a spectrum, and accessibility work is never really done. It's always just an ongoing process. So the Web Content Accessibility Guidelines, which goes by the acronym WCAG, and you might have heard this several different ways. Some people call it WCAG, WCAG. I don't even know all the different pronunciations, but it is the technical standards on web accessibility, and it was developed by the World Wide Web Consortium, or W3, another acronym, in partnerships with experts and organizations. The current version is version 2.2, which was released in October 2023. And these are guidelines that aim to give guidelines to help make websites, apps, electronic documents, other digital assets accessible to people with a broad range of disabilities. They're an international standard for that, and it's comprised of principles, guidelines, success criteria, and techniques. And there's 3 different levels of conformance. There's the A level, which is the lowest, AA, and then AAA, which is the highest. So within the guidelines, the web content guidelines, there are the 4 principles of accessibility. They go by the acronym FOR, which just stands for, it's another acronym, and it's the 4 different principles are perceivable, operable, understandable, and robust, which is where they get the POUR acronym. Perceivable means that the digital space, website, app, user interface is available through sight, hearing, or touch. Operable is it's compatible with keyboard or mouse. People navigate and interact with spaces differently. Understandable refers to it being user-friendly, easy to comprehend. Robust means that it works across browsers, assistive technologies, mobile devices, old devices, new devices, different browsers, and it follows standards. So thinking about the who and who benefits from accessibility, the short answer is that everyone can benefit from accessibility. And there's a lot of great examples of that, that you can think of that have been created over time. One quick example would be curb cuts in sidewalks, which are the little, inlets where the curb is cut away for easy walk. Again, that would be an accessibility feature that was created for people in a wheelchair, but again, someone pushing a baby stroller or wagon would benefit from that. As just an example. But on the screen is a chart, and this chart is from the Microsoft Inclusive Design Guidebook. If you haven't looked through that, it's definitely something to look through, and it's linked in here, and I'm sure that we'll be able to share a copy of the slide so you can have that link. It has a lot of great information, but the chart on this screen, I'll describe it so you know what it is. It is made up of 3 columns, and those columns are labeled permanent, temporary, or situational, and that refers to disability or situational impairment, so whether it's permanent, temporary, or situational. And then there are 4 rows, which are touch, see, hear, and speak. So the 4 rows would relate to an impact or limitation that somebody might have. So for example, when it comes to touch, the permanent disability that's given as an example here is that somebody has 1 arm. The temporary example that's given here is they have an arm injury, and it shows a person wearing a sling or a cast on their arm, so they only have use of 1 arm. And then the situational example would be a new parent. They're carrying a newborn in 1 hand, so they only have access to use 1 hand. So making sure that as you're designing and creating things that can be used by somebody that may have one arm or may have, different types of limitations, but limit their ability to use their hands, arms. Going through the chart under C, the permanent example is being blind. The temporary example is someone with cataracts. And then the situational is a distracted driver. For here, the permanent example is somebody who's deaf. The temporary example is someone with an ear infection. And the situational is a bartender where it's loud. They obviously can't hear in a loud environment. And then the final row is speak. And the permanent example listed is being nonverbal. The temporary is laryngitis. And the situational is a heavy accent. All right. So now the societal considerations can cover some of the who and also why for accessibility. The World Health Organization estimates there are 1 billion people worldwide living with a disability. And the Center for Disease Control and Prevention estimates about 1/4 of all US adults have a disability. We do know that these statistics are not entirely accurate, and it's believed and known that there are far more people with disabilities than have been reported, and that's for a variety of reasons. People don't want to report as having a disability. Sometimes people with different disabilities may not consider themselves as having a disability if they can continue on with life independently with different assistance and aids and living in an accessible environment. But again, variety of reasons why people don't report. So it's also important to note or think about that anybody can become disabled at any point in life. So as we are thinking about the importance of accessibility, it's important to think about those societal considerations. There are, of course, legal considerations. There are many different legal acts and laws and regulations around accessibilities for the US and also nationwide. The first one that's bulleted on this list is the Americans with Disabilities Act, the ADA, which prevents disability-based discrimination and mandates accessibility in various domains. I did just add a new aspect to this. It was on April 8th, which I believe was just last week. The U.S. Attorney General did sign a new rule that providing requirements for digital accessibility under Title II of the ADA. And again, this rule applies to all organizations that are covered under Title II, and those organizations would be programs and activities by state and local governments, which also includes public schools and universities. And there's a requirement now to make all of their web content and mobile apps accessible to the 2.1 level AA of the web content accessibility guidelines. So there is, again, more information linked, which you can read more about, as that is something that just recently came out. There's also the Section 508 of the Rehabilitation Act of 1973, which requires federal agencies to make their electronic and information technology accessible to people with disabilities. In Michigan here, we're close to Canada, so it's if you're in Canada, the Accessible Canada Act, the ACA, similar to our ADA Act, but for Canada. Also the European Accessibility Act, and then there's many others, which again, there's a link here that takes you to the W3 page and lists all the different policies that are around accessibility and disability. So business considerations, there are also many business considerations on why accessibility is important and should be of a focus. It helps minimize legal risk. Many countries have laws requiring digital accessibility, which we just talked about, and the issue is of increased legal concern lately. drive innovation. Accessibility features and products and services often solve unanticipated problems. It can enhance your brand. Diversity and inclusion efforts are important to business success and are accelerated with a clear, well-integrated accessibility commitment and extended market reach. The global market of people with disabilities is over 1 billion people with a spending power of more than 6 trillion. So accessibility often improves the online experience for all users. So again, it's just important to consider. And with that, I'm going to turn it over to Kristen.
All right, thanks, Leslie. So as Leslie just went through, we clearly have really solid cases for a business case, legal case, and societal case for accessibility. So when we're thinking of what's the problem, we're going to focus on two major aspects of those challenges. So the first one is how we actually operationalize accessibility. So Leslie went through WCAG, and the WCAG is technology agnostic, technically. So it's not specific to any previous technology. It's not specific to any new technology. So it is meant to be robust in that fashion, and technically doesn't even actually have to refer to technology. So what makes something accessible is defined. The problem is that how you actually achieve those standards is completely undefined. It's also not defined what the skill set is that's required to make those standards achievable. So the process, as well as what that foundational skill set is in order to do that, both of those things are currently undefined, or there's at least no recognized standard definition like we have for those WCAG guidelines. They don't give advice. They will give you recommendations for how to do it a bit, but not in terms of a full process. And then as a result of that, these, or not really as a byproduct of that, that accessibility skills are rarely taught in academic programs, especially in higher education, even in terms of professional development within the workforce. So quite often you'll find standalone experiences that you might be able to purchase, but they're also not as robust and they're not tailored to individuals, generally speaking. And it makes sense, right? Because if something's not defined, then it's very difficult to teach it in a standardized way. So those two problems are contributing to each other. And then we have the other issue that we see in the accessibility field, with accessibility usually, not always, but usually gets treated as an afterthought. So when we're working at AFB, we work with science institutions, education institutions, we work with corporations, all of the above. And so quite often when we are advocating for accessibility, when we're working with someone to improve their accessibility, it's often after the fact. It's after a product's launch. It's already live. It's in that environment. And as a result, it's all very reactive rather than proactive. Accessibility is happening and considering not throughout the entire process. And when that happens, that means it's not baked in, it's not part of the overall design. So it means you're retrofitting something in there. And that means that quite generally, it's not going to actually be as usable as you'd want it to be. It's not going to be an effective user experience. And you've not had a usable experience from people who are using assistive technology from the whole, from the duration and the life cycle of the product. So why is that happening? So that's when we're started to take a look at the accessible technology skills gap. So I just said that accessibility skills are not, that what that means is not really defined universally. But for the sake of this conversation, the way that we're going to define it here is the ability to purposely create, review, procure digital products that are in line with WCAG and fully usable by people with disabilities. And accessibility can look very different across disciplines, functions, and roles. And that's something, a big theme that you're going to hear as we discuss this further, that accessibility, even as it's starting to be a bit more in the conversation, as it's gaining more awareness, it's still gaining awareness in very isolated ways, thinking about like development, maybe even design, but all roles, it's very difficult to find a role that doesn't have a responsibility for accessibility. And that means a unique set of skills to filter it through and to apply it within a given discipline. So some of those general knowledge areas that we would talk about would be disability awareness, the societal context that Leslie went through previously, historical perspectives, as well as assistive technology itself. Just what are assistive technologies? Broadly speaking, how do they work? And then that really has an impact on how you work with users, as well as how you build digital experiences for them. That leads us to accessibility design, which usually is thinking about user interfaces. Implementation can be literally engineering or developing a product. It might also be something as simple as how we're building up other types of digital spaces, whether it's documents or meeting environments such as this, and other things, other digital ways that we interact with each other. There's accessibility evaluation that can span from actual accessibility testing, which is generally how you hear about accessibility now, but it might also be quality assurance. It might also be something like procurement, which is massively important as we, the customers, want to create accessible digital environments and procure accessible digital environments for all of our users and for all of our audiences. And then there is also, when we start looking isolated, going more in depth and looking at accessibility as a profession, as well as a continuous learning exercise. So if we're thinking about all those aspects, we want to look at why accessibility skills are needed. We know that accessibility is an essential design component for systems, processes, and products in many fields, and a standard. And I would say that at this point, it's pretty much every field in a standard, because there's not a company or organization out there that's not a digital company anymore. We all live and work in the virtual environment. That's where we all here now. I work for a nonprofit and advocacy. We're the furthest away from a digital company that you can imagine, but we have digital assets that we have to make sure we build and create and procure that are accessible. If we have a workplace, that needs to become standard, and it is becoming standard with some of the legislation that Leslie mentioned, as well as that new Title II legislation. And so assistive technologies are becoming increasingly embedded in all of these aspects for industry, governmental service, and private practice, and a legal requirement. But what we like to say is accessibility is anything less than accessible is illegal, and nobody wants to be illegal. So we always aim for that higher bar of usability. And so really investing in accessibility and even further usability, we believe demonstrates a real and actionable commitment to diversity, equity, inclusion. It's easy for those to become words. Accessibility is a key part of inclusion. And so this is a way to, action speaks louder than words, especially in the accessibility field. So if for what we were studying was the accessible technology skills gap. If those are the skills, if that's how we're going to define the skills, we're going to define the gap as a gap in accessibility knowledge and digital skills by students who are graduating and entering the workforce. We also did consider those who are already in the workforce. And we know that there isn't adequate infrastructure to prepare and mentor and support the future workforce because there's not enough accessibility skills and knowledge in the current workforce who would be serving as those mentors or teachers or instructors. So it's very foundational. It shouldn't be with where we are, but it is. And so a common theme that we will hear and have heard for a very long time is that most of the developers or designers that do have some accessibility knowledge are self-taught, or they learn accessibility on the job. I can tell you that that is my even own personal experience as a member of the accessibility field. And almost all of my colleagues, we learned by just being in the right place at the right time as interns. And for years, we just observed and we were able to ask questions. And we didn't learn in any kind of structured way because there aren't structured ways for us to learn. And so that can be not a reliable way for learning, and it's not sustainable, but also B, it can be a bit dangerous as well, because if you're self-taught, you can very easily teach yourself the wrong things if there's nothing that you could check that with. We were lucky that we were surrounded by assistive technology users who we could ask questions to, and that really helped. But that's not something that everyone's going to be able to have access to. So, but that doesn't mean that accessibility doesn't become important if you're not witnessing it every day. So because of that, in 2018, the Partnership on Employment and Accessible Technology, or PEAT, conducted a survey to try to define that accessible technology skills gap. And what they found was that the results definitely supported the need to increase attention to education and training, to building that skill set. And that survey actually provided a lot of background for a lot of the work that Teach Access does, that ASB does. And so we wanted to check in on that. So we conducted a similar survey. We updated it in 2022 to gauge what that current gap is. So here are some of the results. And shocking, the gap still absolutely exists, is what we found. So we pulled out a couple of key highlights. We had 107 respondents, and they were very much a mixture of corporate industry, higher education, advocacy groups, and general nonprofits. And so what we found were that 75% of respondents did see a moderate to significant increase for employees with accessibility skills in their organizations within the last 5 years. So it's definitely a growing trend. And more than that, with 86% saying that they anticipated that demand for accessibility skills to increase and to continue to increase. At the same time, only 2% said it was easy for their organization to find candidates with accessibility skills. And some of these folks were looking for dedicated accessibility roles, and there were others who were just looking for accessibility skills just in all of their employees and any employee candidates. However, what we also discovered was that there was a disconnect between what they said they wanted in terms of accessibility skills and needing those skills versus how they were actually trying to procure them, because they said they weren't able to. At the same time, there was a significant gap between how they said what they needed and what their hiring practices were. So they acknowledged that accessibility expertise is important and is growing in terms of need, but many of them did not include requirements for accessibility skills or any kind of credential in the job descriptions that they were hiring for, particularly design and development. But this goes to the other problem of that accessibility skills shouldn't only be considered for design and development roles. And then even if those requirements were included, they weren't necessarily enforced during the hiring process or within the job responsibilities. And we do see this all the time, but quite often, a lot of that has to do with the fact that the folks who are hiring, they don't have that skill set either. And so I can understand where it would be very uncomfortable to ask folks and to interview and to have requirements and to build requirements for people who have a skill set you're looking for that you do not, and no one on your team does either, and you're feeling very underprepared to ask those questions, which we have a resource for you that we'll tell you about at the end. However, so because of this as well, and we're talking about this demand, it's causing another kind of problem, which is that for the few folks who do actually come to the job market with these skills, they are in high demand and there's a lot of competition for them. That's great for the job seeker, but if we're looking at it as an overall field perspective, smaller organizations in particular really do struggle to attract and retain those qualified candidates who can have an impact on the accessibility of their products, because they get outbid by larger corporations who can offer higher salaries and benefits and prestige as well. And so that really is exacerbating the gap for accessibility skills that already exist when we're looking at the diversity of accessible products that are available. The rich are getting richer and the poor are getting poorer in the concept of digital inclusion and accessibility. So we want to talk about how we're going to bridge that gap. That's the problem. What are we going to do for it? So we know that to bridge this gap, this is a huge problem. This is a systemic problem that is not going to have a single solution. And it's not going to be one source that's going to be able to change it. We've had accessibility laws or laws that reference accessibility, laws that reference WCAG, and we still haven't solved it. So we know that this is going to need to be a major collaborative effort. And it's collaborative in terms of addressing the holistic skills gap between governments, industries, educational institutions, communities, and so forth. But it also has to be collaborative within each of those bodies. So it's not just one person's responsibility or one group's responsibility. It's collaborative internally and it's collaborative externally. So what do we really need to do if we're looking at all these different elements that need to happen and take place? So we know that we don't have enough of a solid foundation. We have WCAG defining accessibility, but we discussed we don't have definitions for accessibility skills. We don't have definitions for how to do it. And so the number one thing that we know that still needs to happen is accessibility awareness. So that way we can identify the barriers that prevent people from disabilities from fully participating in the digital space. What we did find through the survey is that there has been a significant shift from between that 2018 survey to the 2022 survey in terms of organizations recognizing the importance of incorporating accessibility into their processes, into their organizations, and so forth. That is huge. The work is still not done. It's shocking almost to think about that accessibility is not just an assumption in terms of a need, but it's still not. So that's organizations like Teach Access, like AFB, and all kinds of other advocates, that really is a huge focal point. But we are seeing significant growth in that area in terms of awareness. But in addition to that, we also know that once people are aware, they need to know where to go and how to get started. And so that competencies framework that is missing really does need to be built up. So that way we can provide roadmaps essentially for how to implement those standards. And so that's being done in several different ways, some through advocacy, like with policy making. That's something AFB does. There's work that Teach Access is doing in order to make it an accreditation standard. Then there's also other work that organizations like ours are doing, which are creating programs to teach those skills. And that is another kind of grassroots way of creating a roadmap for it. So we can start working towards standardization for it. But after we have that foundation, we really need to focus on building capacity. And that's where we really start to democratize the process. So we need to build out individual capacity, absolutely, working directly with students as well as professionals, because accessibility is an ongoing process. It does require continuous learning and practice. We all here know technology does not stand still. Accessibility cannot stand still. We're starting to build awareness just that it's a need. And now we as a community are starting to grapple with the idea of AI. And AI is controversial everywhere, certainly controversial in the accessibility world. So we always have to continue to learning to grow ourselves and to grow our technology with it in terms of its accessibility and our assistive technologies. And so making sure that that's implemented in a standardized way is going to be really, really important. But the other part of that is that there needs to be institutional capacity as well. We can all work together to start preparing individuals with training, with what they need. But what we also really need to think about is how accessibility should be embedded in an organization's culture and everyone's responsibility, which cannot be overstressed enough. Even if it's asking the question, you don't necessarily need to be a designer or developer to ask, is this accessible? It's something that should be at the forefront of all questioning when we're thinking about a product, whether we're building it or we're buying it, or we're about to use it, because we as the customer have a very important voice. And we want to make sure that our organizations, our workplaces, our places of learning are also accessible there. And a lot of folks are trying to do it in that grassroots way, as we talked about, but we definitely need to, which is fantastic, but it's still not meeting the needs. We're still grossly under the accessible technology level that we want. It's still more rare rather than the norm, and we want to get over that gap. So we also want to be thinking about, as I kind of highlighted before, about continuous growth and improvement. So once we have that, before we even have the learning opportunities for it, we have to already be thinking about expanding the learning opportunities. It's so important that we begin training those students that we have in accessibility skills, but we also have to look at the students who we've had in the past, and we also need to make sure that we don't abandon, let's say, the students that we've had, because it's not going to stop development. So making sure that we treat accessibility like a lifelong competency. Just because you learned something a while ago doesn't mean that it's necessarily still going to be relevant, and processes update. So we need to make sure that we have learning opportunities that touch all areas of career development with that. And then we believe very much so that fostering communities of practice where we can actually go and discuss and build out as practitioners and exchange ideas to how to actually effectively implement accessibility is going to be essential. Cross-industry collaboration in that way can only be supportive. And it is very much, accessibility is very much a troubleshooting exercise. And we shouldn't neglect that as part of our way to learn, as well as to implement. It's not a bad thing. So the other things that we want to think about are setting new standards for the curriculum. We know we want accessibility skills integrated into all aspects of the curriculum. We know that we are starting with computer science as a primary focal point, but we don't want to end there, and we don't necessarily want others to think that those are the only folks who are responsible for it, or even just accessibility specialists as they exist and as they develop. They will not be the only ones who are responsible for it, because they can't touch everything. Those will be more rare. So we need to make sure everybody is asking the accessibility question. And we do have some progress there, for sure. But we want to make sure that it's a requirement moving forward. And that's what Teach Access in particular is working so hard for, to achieve that accreditation within educational programs. And the other thing that we can absolutely do is become an ally, where we support and sponsor and amplify the work of diverse organizations for disability advocacy groups, and making sure that there are authentic connections between all of these types of organizations, so that way we can be actively engaged in accessibility for the long haul. So that was a lot. I've given you a lot to think about. So we're going to start talking a little bit about what are some steps and some practical ways and resources towards that accessibility journey. But as I pass it over to Leslie, I want you to chew on. We talked about that this is a major systemic problem. It is not going to be solved by one group, one type of group, by one person for sure, but that we all have a responsibility towards it. So just thinking about how you want to process this next part of the information, thinking about what is your role advancing accessibility and inclusiveness. What is your avenue that you can have a direct impact on, small or large? I'm going to pass it over to Leslie for us to think about our accessibility journey.
Thank you, Kristen. This is Leslie speaking again. As Kristen said, we're going to talk about how to start your accessibility journey. So ways to get started. We at Teach Access have a lot of programs and resources, and the great thing about our programs and resources is that they are all free and available for anyone to access. We have a list on the screen, and they're linked, and again, we'll make sure and share a link to the slide so you will be able to access all the links at the end of the presentation. But The first is Teach Access by Design, and this is a facilitated online course that introduces educators and administrators to concepts related to accessibility, disability, and universal design. And this program typically runs in the fall. So for all of these programs, you'll definitely, keep an eye out on it for social media, and you can sign up for a newsletter so you can see when they call for proposals or applications open. So side note. Our fellowship program is, again, another program for educators and administrators, which helps them in a community setting to put together an action plan for teaching about accessibility into their courses. This is a year-long program that runs, and the application typically opens again in the fall. Our Teach Access Grants program is a grants program, so we will give funding to educators that are teaching courses in higher education, college or university, and would like to incorporate content curriculum about accessibility into their courses. We just closed our application for this round. Our application for grants typically opens in February, March, so early springtime. So keep an eye for that. The Teach Access Curriculum Repository, the TACR, another acronym, everyone has lots of acronyms, is a free resource. It's open educational resources. So from our grants program and a lot of our different programs, we have been collecting curriculum that have been created by different educators and faculty about teaching accessibility, and it's all organized in this repository. So again, you can go on to our website and sign up for it and be able to access a ton of great resources. There are presentations, slideshows, assignments, all projects that faculty have used, all kinds of great information. The accessibility courses, our accessibility courses, again, they're free. We have 11 courses at this point. The courses are on a variety of different topics. They are online and self-paced. So you can sign up for them and take them at your own speed. And they're on a variety of topics related to accessibility across different disciplines. The Accessibility Skills Hiring Toolkit is a resource that we offer, and it's mainly for people who are in a role that they will be hiring. It provides job descriptions, sample interview questions, different things that you would incorporate into a job that you're hiring related to accessibility. So what kind of skills you would be looking for to make sure you would get somebody in that role that knows about accessibility. And again, those interview questions of what to ask to judge or gauge their knowledge on accessibility. The last resource that is on our side of the list is the Power of Advocacy. And this is a video recording of Lainey Feingold, who's a civil rights lawyer and also one of our Teach Access board members. And she had given this talk to our student ambassadors, students, but it's a really great resource just to learn about how to advocate for accessibility. So it's definitely worth watching. And Kristen, I'll let you take it away to talk about the AFB initiatives.
Thanks, Leslie. So we have at AFB, being a 100-year-old organization, as you can imagine, there's a wide range of things and types of things that we do, but I pulled out a couple that I hope will be of interest for you guys here. So the first one is our digital accessibility internships, which are for students, for any student, no matter what degree or level, as long as it's higher education. And so there are a couple different experiences within that. There's a summer boot camp, which is meant to be, a little shorter, a little more flexible. And then there are also more extended work studies and residencies for folks who maybe are a little bit more interested in pursuing accessibility wholly as a career. So we have our internship programs, and we do partner with schools for those programs as well to support their students. We also have ASB Client Solutions, where we work with anyone and everyone who either has a product or they procure a product and they have accessibility goals for it and want to create accessible digital environments for their own customers or their employees. We also do research in that respect as well. One of the research studies that I've linked that might be of interest is the barriers to digital inclusion, which our researchers did. We've talked very much here, and the survey that we did for the accessibility skills gap was from the employer perspective or the corporate perspective. For this survey, this actually looks at the accessible technology gap from the user perspective. So that's slightly different if you wanted to check that out. And it's much more from their experiences there. We also, when we're thinking about expanding the importance of who asks the accessibility question, who's responsible for it, we have the HR professionals and hiring manager toolkit to make sure that hiring practices are accessible and all those environments, applications being one of them, as well as onboarding. And this doesn't necessarily have to apply only to workplace, but anyone who onboards anyone who potentially would have a disability or even the application process for it. So we have that toolkit available. And then we also have two publications that I wanted to highlight. We've got the Journal of Visual Impairment and Blindness, which is our peer-reviewed journal. And then we have Access World, which is just an online magazine. It comes out quarterly, and it's much more casual, let's say, and a bit more practical as well.
Thanks, Kristen. We have one final slide that has opportunities to get involved in supporter work. You can review them on your time, and we would like to open a space for Q&A.
Thank you. That was incredible. That was incredible. Let's get those questions flowing.
You're welcome to type them in the chat or come up mute and bring your question or comments as well.
I actually had a question about, you were talking about how even though these corporations are saying that they need their candidates to know about accessibility, it's not always a formal requirement of the job that they're posting. Could that also be because if they made it a formal requirement, that might limit the number of applicants they would get?
Potentially, yes. So there's a lot of fear that surround accessibility, to be quite honest. And so yes, I would absolutely. We've seen that, and we know that even ourselves, by making it a requirement just within our organization, and how that impacts your candidate pool, and people will self-excuse, right? They won't go for it because they don't believe that they have that skill set. So that is very much a factor, as well as not necessarily knowing how to ask for it. And to be quite honest, sometimes employers who do ask for it, they accidentally exclude themselves because they find certain things that they grasp onto that seem standardized, that seem like, hey, this is a type of certification or something that we could ask for. It's related to accessibility as some kind of proof that these folks know those skills. But a lot of times that trust or faith in that is a bit misplaced and doesn't necessarily refer or relate to an actual usable skill set. So I think all of those things are a factor that have a negative impact from all around.
Yeah. I know that there's
it's a chicken and the egg problem. Sorry.
Yeah, I heard a talk from somebody from Microsoft, and in her division within Microsoft, every engineer that they hired, they sent them to the trusted tester programming before they were actually allowed to to come onto the job. So it wasn't really it wasn't that they required it already of people. But if they just automatically sent all their engineers through that training. So I thought that was,
Yeah, no.
yeah.
Yeah, so a lot of companies will invest in that way, which is fantastic. Although we would caution as well that those certifications are a great foundational point, but that kind of goes back as well to what we were highlighting for continuous learning, because, for example, it's interesting, the trusted tester has great knowledge, but you don't actually have to even test the product through that, which is interesting through the name. So that's just something that it's a great starting point and something we absolutely advocate for organizations to do. We just never want to leave it there.
Yeah. I just want to, I see that people are having to leave to go on to their next meetings. We did not do the drawing this month. We kind of ran out of time, but I'll tell you what, I'm going to do the drawing, and trust me, the first name that comes up, you will be getting a free or an accessibility documents course from Webbing. So look for an email. I'll post it in the Slack channel too. Thank you, everyone. Thank you so much to all of you from Teach Access. You guys were brilliant.